Hi, and welcome to Quilting with Lori. My name is Lori Dickman. Today I'm going to be working on a jelly roll project since tomorrow is Jelly Roll Saturday. And I want to direct you out to my website where you can locate some free jelly roll patterns. I do have a resource tab on my website. I'll have a link below so you can get directly to that. But it will take you to Fat Quarter Club, which has a number of free jelly roll patterns. And today I'm going to be working on this one. It's called Dart. It's in earth views. They've used some beautiful batiks and white fabrics in this one. But what I'm going to be doing today is using my scrap stash. You know me, I've got to get my scraps used up. So I'm going into my 2.5-inch strip bin, and I'm going to be using strips from my 2.5-inch bin to make this beautiful quilt. The second project I want to also share with you, and I might have to do it on a different video since I have an appointment later that I need to get to, but you can find another pattern on that same resource link, which takes you to the Fat Quarter Club. But this one's called Jelly Roll Railway, and it's done in some Christmas fabrics. I'm going to do mine in some fall fabrics because I would like to make this not as a big quilt, but as a centerpiece or a center table area for my table upstairs in the kitchen. Again, for both of these jelly roll projects, I am using my scrap stash and things that I already have. But you might be interested in taking a browse around out there on the Fat Quarter Club. They have some wonderful jelly rolls out there for you. This one that I'm doing today is, they're showing Robert Kaufman fabrics. Let's see, what's the name? I guess it would be Earth Views. It's designed by Ariga Wilson for RK, for Robert Kaufman. So that's something that you might want to check out if you don't have a jelly roll and you want to purchase one. And then this other pattern that I'm going to be using, they're using some Christmas plain fabrics, but they're some of their other fabrics here are Berry Merry Jelly Roll. So that's another jelly roll project that you can find out there on my Fat Quarter Club link. So check that out, see if there's something out there that you like. But if not, you can certainly use up your scrap stash, just like I'm going to be doing today. So now let's go to the tabletop and see what's required for this project. So I have gone into my 2.5-inch strip container and grabbed some lights and printed strips. And my lights they vary from plains to some with pinks and lavenders and greens. So I've got quite a variety of those. The pattern requires, let's see, you need a total of 19 with the fabric strips for the lights. And then for the prints, you need a total of 25 strips. So if you're using a jelly roll, you won't actually use all of the prints in it, but the darker prints. But I went into my stash and just pulled some. They go from very dark blacks to blues to greens to pinks. And that's the array of colors that I'm using for this pattern. And again, this is what it looks like. There's a close-up of it. Very simple to make. As we're going through this, we're going to be putting together strips. Let me show you here. Just like this for the entire quilt. And then we'll be adding white, either rectangles or squares on each end to stagger each of those strips. We also need 1.5-inch strips in the lights to finish everything out. There are going to be sashings in between each of these rows. Very simple to make. I'm going to go ahead and get mine cut out here, and we're going to start with the lights. And what you need to do with your lights, you're going to have 19 2.5-inch with the fabric strips here. And we're going to cut 34 that are 6.5-inch rectangles, 41 that are 4.5-inch rectangles, and 16 that are 2.5-inch rectangles. We're going to do that first, and then there's another step that we're going to get to here in just a minute. Let me make those initial cuts first, and I'll be right back. As you can see here, I have cut all of my prints and all of my lights. And I just followed the instructions here. From the lights, I cut, let me look at this so I'm telling you correctly. I cut 34 that were 6.5-inch rectangles. I cut 41 that are 4.5-inch rectangles, and I cut 16 that are 2.5-inch squares. And then the balance of those light with the fabric strips, we're going to be sewing them together and using them for the border, and I'll deal with that later. Let's go to the prints. So from the prints, those are the strips in the roll-up. From each one, I cut one that was a 30.5-inch strip, one that was a 6.5-inch rectangle, and one that was a 3.5-inch rectangle. So that came from each of the strips. And there were 25 strips that you needed to pull from your jelly roll or from your stash. And I am obviously working from my stash. What I did have left over from these strips, every width of fabric strip from different lines or different lengths. So I had a variety of leftover pieces here. Some of these I can cut into 2.5-inch squares and use them in my scrap stash. Some of them I could just throw in my crumb basket because they're smaller, but they'll work great for crumb quilting. And I will put some crumb quilt, my playlist for my crumb quilting projects in the description box below, so you can know what that's about and how you can use your leftover pieces for crumb quilting. Now we're going to go ahead and get these strips sewn together. When you put together each one of the strips that has a colored fabric in it, we're going to be putting together the centers of them. So we're not actually finishing out the very ends, which will have light rectangles or squares of some size. What we're going to do is put together every single strip just identical to this one. So I've started with a 3.5-inch print, and then a 4.5-inch light, a 6.5-inch print, a 6.5-inch light, and then the 30.5-inch print. They will be sewn together just like that. You might want to lay out all of your prints and lights that you're going to work with together on your table next to your machine, and maybe you can actually chain piece all of this together. Once all of those are done, and I'm going to press mine so that they're pressed to the dark fabric, then we're going to finish each of them, and we'll come to that in a little bit, but we're either going to add a 6.5-inch light to one end or a 4.5 with a 2.5-inch. And we're going to do that all the way down, which causes that beautiful stagger in the quilt itself. Very simple process. You just have to follow the diagram, identify how you want to lay out your colored strips. In the order you might want to use the design wall or the floor and lay those out, and then start adding your rectangle pieces once each of the center strips have been sewn together and pressed. So I'm going to go ahead and start chain piecing all of my center strips, starting with the print, ending with the print, and adding these two lights with another print here in the center. So I went ahead and did chain piecing, and I started with the smallest one on this side, added, this is the 3.5-inch print, 4.5-inch light, 6.5-inch print, 6.5-inch light. Now I'm going to simply add the 30.5-inch pieces that belong on this end. So I'm going to lay them all over here. I'm going to start at the top, actually, up here on this one, and I'm just going to continue sewing all the way down, and I'll do another strip piece row matching all of these. So I'm going to start with this one up there, lay it on top, sew it, and continue on down. That's how I strip piece the whole thing. It really goes together quickly. I've put all of these together in about 35 minutes. At this point, I have all of the rows pieced together. So that's with the printed cotton and the lights. So those are all ready to go. And there are 25 of these strip rows. I have leftover 6.5, leftover 4.5, and leftover 2.5-inch light squares. These are going to go on each end of these pieces to create that staggered look, and we'll get to that in just a minute. Then the other thing that I have done is I've taken all of my 1.5-inch strips from my stash. I've pieced them end to end, and then I've cut 24 55.5-inch sections. So each one of these, let me see if I can pull one out. Each one of these is 1.5 inches wide, and it's 55.5 inches long. And they do have different fabrics that are sewn together. So I just simply sewed them end to end, and that's what I've got. So I've got 24 of those. These are the sashing rows. So this is the block, if you will, the strip block, and this is the sashing that's going to go in between each of them. Before I can sew the sashing to these, I do have to finish each and every one of these. And that means I need to identify how I want to actually lay them out in the quilt. And that's where you're going to go to page 3 in your PDF. And identify how you're going to stagger your rows. And then you'll be adding either, in this case, I'll be adding a 6.5-inch rectangle to one end. The next one would be in a 4.5 and a 2.5. The third one, we're going to do a reverse, a 4.5 over here, a 2.5 there. And then we're going to do a 6.5 here with nothing on that end. That creates the first 4 rows, if you will, and we'll sash them with the 1.5-inch sashing in between. So that's what you're going to need to do. Lay out your printed rows first, identify how you want them to look in your quilt, and then you're going to finish off the row based upon the PDF. And I would recommend either using a design wall or use the floor to accomplish that. Here is the finished quilt top. As you can see, I've put it together with the brighter colors toward the bottom, then it goes toward the greens and the blues, and then the very dark, dark blues at the top. Look at that wonderful movement. It's sort of a chevron look and feel to the quilt top. It's such a simple one to make. I hope that you'll all try this. Mine, of course, is a curated scrappy strip with using my jelly roll strips. They're 2.5-inch strips. You'll see that I've used a lot of different scraps and the 1.5-inch sashing as well. The outside of the quilt is bordered with additional 2.5-inch strips. So predominantly the quilt is made with 2.5-inch jelly roll strips in lights and a beautiful print. And you can certainly curate this from your own scrap stash, or you can purchase a jelly roll and then have some fabric that you cut into strips. And it also includes 1.5-inch strips that you use to sash each of the strips with. Thank you so much for joining me today as I've put together this beautiful jelly roll quilt entitled Dart. And again, I'll have a link below to this PDF that you can grab. It's out on my resource tab in my website, quiltingwithlori.com. Go to the resource tab, and then you can click on the Fat Quarter Club, and I'll take you to this particular link. It is a free pattern. It's a beautiful pattern. Again, you can purchase a jelly roll. Maybe you have a jelly roll at home that you can work on, or you can curate your own jelly roll from your scrap stash, which is what I did. My goal is to use up my stash. So that's what I did today, and I got quite a bit of it used up, and I'm quite pleased about that. I wanted to also begin this project, and it was going to be the center table runner for my kitchen table using some fall fabrics. This is using the Jelly Roll Railway quilt pattern, also on the Fat Quarter Club. It's a free pattern. I'm not going to get to this today, but I'll work on this next week, and I'll make sure I do a video and share with you how I put it together. But I think it's going to be fun. It's just going to be 4 of the blocks that will go together and make a nice square centerpiece for my kitchen table. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you don't have a scrap stash already cut, sorted, and organized, ready to use, you can go out to my website and take a peek at my Speedy Solutions to Cut and Organize Your Scrap Stash books. This is a set. This is the techniques book. This is the patterns book. Between the two, you get all of the techniques to get your scrap stash ready to go so that you can make some beautiful quilts with it. And you also get a total of 17 patterns. So it's something that you might want to take a look at. If nothing else, go out and look at the video that corresponds to this techniques book. It will teach you how I go through and scrap up my stash. And I will link all of that below. The book set, the video, everything will be linked below if you're interested in taking a peek at that. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you were inspired to use up your scraps, maybe curate a jelly roll of your very own from your scrap stash. And so until next week, have a wonderful week and happy quilting. I had to bring the quilt outside so that you could get a better look at the completed quilt in the daylight here. I think it turned out beautifully. I can't wait to get it quilted. As you can see, each of those printed rows needed to have finishing rectangles or squares on each end, depending on where it was positioned within the quilt. And it creates this beautiful design, which I just love.